Hey guys, it's Alex. I'm here with yet another young adult contemporary book talk. I've got 3 books for y'all today that I read to add to the ever-growing list of book reviews I've done on young adult contemporary novels. The first novel I have to talk about is Exit Pursued by a Bear by E.K. Johnston. This book is about a girl named Hermione who is drugged and raped at her cheerleading camp, and the story follows her throughout the school year after as she learns to cope and deal with the rape and continue on with her life. I really wanted to like this book because I'd heard such good things and it sounded like such an interesting story, but I really couldn't get into it. For whatever reason, and it wasn't something I could really put my finger on, I couldn't get into any of the characters. I couldn't feel their emotions. It was like I was being told what they were feeling as opposed to experiencing it myself. And it didn't do anything for me. I wound up reading this book, sticking with it largely because I was interested in the sort of whodunit aspect of the crime, which was not what this was about at all. It was a very character-driven emotional journey, and I felt entirely disconnected from emotion throughout this book. There were also scenes that completely lost me. Like when all the girls were gathered towards the end and talking about colleges and where they were going. I didn't recognize any of the colleges they were talking about, and to be quite honest, I didn't know who half the characters were who were talking about it. Like, I obviously knew Hermione, and I knew her best friend, and I knew one of the other girls. I recognized her name, but there were 2 or 3 more, and I didn't have a clue who they were. I felt bad at that point, and I was like, well, this is towards the end. Like, if I don't know who the minor characters are towards the end, then I was never gonna learn them. And that's not on me so much as it is on the author for not making them memorable or interesting characters or introducing them well enough. The writing in this wasn't bad. There were lines I enjoyed and descriptions of emotion that I felt were particularly beautiful. I just didn't connect to it, and it was a character-driven story where feeling the emotion of Hermione was the point of the story, and since I couldn't feel anything, there wasn't much point in me reading this. Like, I'm sure if you could connect to the main character, that you would quite enjoy the story if you like character-driven stories. I just didn't, and I wanted to so badly. My only other complaint was that it was a little bit too perfect and too neatly wrapped up in the end, and everything sort of seemed to go along perfectly after the rape, except for her boyfriend, and just except for those 2 aspects, everyone was as perfectly supportive as they could be, and everything went along as planned, and it was just like, it was a little bit too neat for my taste. I just felt like it should have been messier. Like, in a more realistic story, it would have been messier. It would have been more things for her to deal with, more consequences of what happened, as opposed to the way it kind of was, and everyone was sort of on her side, and everyone was so incredibly supportive and perfect, and the cops were lovely, and her coach was lovely, and her parents and her friends and her schoolmates were lovely, and it was just, it didn't really ring true to me in that aspect. I gave this book 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It was just kind of disappointing because I was really excited to read this, and I thought it was going to be so good, and I read it the evening that I picked it up from the library, and I didn't care about anything, and by the end of this I was just like, oh, like that was it, and it was sort of forgettable, and to be honest, I'm already forgetting it just a little bit. The second book I read was We Were Liars by Lockhart. This was also a 3-star read for me. I almost gave it 2 stars, and then the ending was just a little bit emotional for me. Like, I felt a great deal of emotion towards the end of this book, and that was enough to push it into the 3-star range. But I didn't really like this so much. It was, how do I put this? It was weirdly written. I quite enjoy experimental artsy writing. Like, I love books that take risks with that. I love Written on the Body. I love Syzygy Beauty. I love books that do that, and this did that. It just didn't work. It was about this girl, Cadence, who belongs to a rich family, and they have their own private island where they go every summer. She had an accident and a traumatic brain injury, and it basically is her dealing with that and coming to grips with what has happened. That is pretty much all I can say without massive spoilers. So you kind of have to go into this without knowing much if you want to really enjoy it, because this is the kind of book that spoilers ruin. The writing was distracting for me. Like, it was kind of weird and boring, and then she would throw in all these weird metaphors that sounded literal, and half the time I thought they were literal. Like, she would say, "Oh, my father pulled out a handgun and shot me in the chest," and this was 2 chapters in or something, and I was like, oh my god, that took a turn. And then it took me 2 paragraphs to realize, oh, that was a metaphor. He metaphorically shot her in the chest. And then I would have to go back and reread it knowing that it was a metaphor. She did have physical reactions to her traumatic brain injury. Like, she would say, like, oh, she blacked out and threw up. And that would be literal. And then she would say, you know, this boy bandaged my arms with gauze and stopped my bleeding. And I was like, so is that also literal, or is that a metaphor? And there was a lot of that, and it took me out of the story because I was like making guesses as to what was really going on. My other big problem with this book was that it was one of those books where everyone is keeping some big secret, and sort of the point of the book is based around what is this secret, and it just got annoying really fast. Like, I could tell there was just someone dancing around singing about how they have a secret and they can't tell me, and it just irritated me. Like, I didn't really care about the situation around the secret as much as I was just like, oh, can I just please flip to the end and figure out what the secret is and be done with this book? And it was a really short book. I couldn't care. Like, from the very beginning, it was that big, here's a secret. What's the secret? Can you figure it out? And then, I don't like books that are based around one secret. It's why I sometimes have trouble with thrillers. Because once you figure out the big secret, there's literally no more point to the book. You don't care about the situation surrounding it. You don't care about the characters. It's just, oh, well, there it is, and everything's over now. And that's kind of what this book was. I wasn't a super big fan of the ending, and I can't really talk about why. But it's not my favorite kind of ending. I've read it before, and it always kind of like, oh, that's a disappointment ending. But it did make me feel emotions. I don't really understand why people love this book so much, but to each his own. It wasn't my kind of thing, but I can see how people would like it. I gave it 3 stars, and I won't bother rereading it again. The final book I read was The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. There are 3 narrators in this book. There's Alex, there's PK, who stands for literally PK, Preacher's Kid, which was weird, and then there was Jack. Alex's sister was raped and murdered a few years previous, and Alex murdered the guy who killed her because he got away with it. And then this basically follows Alex wondering if she's a sociopath, and Jack dealing with he has emotional feelings for Alex, and then PK becomes Alex's friend, and the story kind of goes from there. There's a lot about rape culture and stuff in this book, which I felt was important, but it always took like the very obvious, not always, it usually took the very obvious rape culture route, like, here is a literal rape that is happening. Oh look, rape culture. Here is a pedophile who assaulted a child. Rape culture. Here is a serial killer who raped and murdered a girl. Rape culture. And it's like, there's a lot more to it than that. My favorite scene was during the assembly, when the cop was pointing out, you know, like 1 in 4 girls, or 1 in 5 girls are raped or something, and he pointed to, like, a group of the main characters at the front. There were 5 girls staying together, and he said, "One of you will be raped." And one of the boys made a joke and was like, "Oh, I hope it's the pretty one." And, like, she was really, the girl he pointed out was, like, really upset about it and crying later. And, like, that hit me really hard emotionally. Like, I felt like that was, the book needed more of that and less there were 18 different rapists in this tiny, tiny town. Just in general, the violence in this didn't seem real to me. Like, the way the characters all dealt with violence, like, rape, yes, but also assault and murder, just didn't, it felt very abnormal, like, very strange, very disconnected from reality. And I couldn't get into it, like, even when, like, the murders, when Alex murdered people, like, I swear people were more concerned with, like, oh, well, how does this affect our relationship, rather than this girl literally committed murder, like, something needs to be done, like, someone is dead, and they'd be like, but how does this affect my romantic feelings? And it was like, that's weird. That was weird to me. Like, the violence kind of seemed over the top, possibly, or, like, the characters' reactions to the violence were off, and I couldn't ever get, like, oh, this is happening in our world. It kind of seemed like, you know, a thriller type thing, where it's, like, sort of otherworldly, like a horror story, where it's not entirely grounded in reality. That's what it felt like to me. And I couldn't get into it for that reason. Like, all the characters seemed sort of weird, and there wasn't much of a plot. It was just sort of following them around and their hormones, and there was a lot more emphasis on relationships than there was the murders going on, which was weird. And I gave it 3 stars because it was interesting. It didn't really do much for me, and I would have liked to see more grounded, small examples of rape culture than throwing every type of violent rape that the author could think of out there. But that was just me and personal taste, and for 3 stars, it was fine. I know some of those books are quite popular, and I gave them all 3 stars, which is, like, a very mediocre review for me. So, I'm sorry that wasn't quite so interesting, but let me know down below what you thought of these books, because I know, like, everyone is reading most of them now, or has read them by now. But I would like to know what you guys thought of whatever you read, or if you're planning to add them to your TBR. Just let me know down in the comments below what y'all thought of these books. And I will be with you probably next week for yet another young adult contemporary novel review. Bye, guys.